Doreen Vanderstoop is a storyteller, musician, and writer based in Calgary, Alberta. Doreen sings, plays guitars, and performs stories of all kinds for audiences of all ages. Her debut novel, Watershed, was published by Freehand Books and has received critical acclaim. Doreen has participated in author panels at the Calgary Public Library, Victoria Festival of Authors, Word on the Street Toronto, and on the National Arts Centre's Canada Performs series. Doreen also leads workshops to inspire in others a passion for story, written and oral. It's my very honor and pleasure to introduce my good friend, Doreen Vanderstoop.
Thank you very much, Chantel, for that lovely introduction. Thank you to you and Ginger for organizing this wonderful concert tonight, and to my fellow storytellers who told such rich, beautiful stories and did it so well. I was very much struck by Maria's story, partly because my story involves superstition as well. But I was thinking, if there was ever a year that we all need to throw water out our back door and make a sign of the cross, it's 2020. So thank you for your story, Maria. It was beautiful. Dutch people are no strangers to superstition. And so this is a little story that has some superstition in it. The story, oh, is there no sound? Are you not hearing me? Oh, I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. So this story is called The Boy Who Wanted More Cheese, and it's from my home country of the Netherlands. Klaas van Bommel was a 12-year-old Dutch boy who lived with his family on a dairy farm in the Netherlands. He was 5 feet tall, weighed 100 pounds, and he had hair the color of carrots. It was cut level from under one ear right around to the other. Now, of course, as was the custom, he wore wooden shoes, very much like the ones I'm showing you right here. He also wore a rough blue linen shirt, and he wore woolen breeches, the pant legs of which were as wide as coffee bags. Now, they were gathered at the ankle, so when Klaas wore them, he looked like he had an upside down cowbell on each leg. But the most striking thing about Klaas was his appetite. Now, the Van Bommel family was not rich, but they ate well. For breakfast and supper, well, Klaas would eat, fresh baked bread and creamy milk. At lunchtime, he would have a great big platter of boiled potatoes that he would dip in a bowl of melted butter. Delicious. And at every meal, there was cheese. Now, the Van Bommel pantry at any given time looked like there was enough cheese in it to feed a small army. Still, Klaas's mother always doled it out in very thin slices, which the boy considered not thick enough. At every meal, Klaas cried out, "Meer kaas, moeder, meer kaas." More cheese, mother, more cheese. Well, his father would wag his finger at him and ask if he had a well underneath his blue linen shirt. And his mother, she would shake her head and call him boter and eieren, butter and eggs. Well, that was the name of the weed that irked her so in her garden. One summer evening, after a well-deserved scolding, Klaas moped off to bed. He had teased each of his three sisters into giving him their piece of cheese. Well, their slices on top of his own made his belly feel quite full. Well, he dragged himself up those stairs all the way up to the attic because that's where his room was. Klaas wasn't feeling so well and wanted to get a little fresh air. Well, one of the dakpanna, the roof tiles, had been taken out to put in a small window. Klaas pulled over a little stool, stood up on the stool, opened that little window so he could smell some of that fresh air from the pine trees on the nearby sand dunes. As he sniffed that fresh air, well, he did start to feel a little better. When he looked out at the trees, he was surprised to see twinkling lights among them. And then the lights approached the house. And they came right up to the roof and they circled around the chimney a few times and then passed back and forth in front of Klaas's little window. Then he heard a whispered invitation. Wij hebben veel kaas. Wij hebben veel kaas. Kom. We have plenty of cheese. We have plenty of cheese. Come. Klaas hesitated. He had heard the wise old women of the village talk about the enchanted ladies of the woods. They warned the travelers about them. And Klaas himself had seen the fairy rings of mushrooms in the clearings in the woods that were purported to be the gateway to the fairy realm. And when you went through the gateway, sometimes you didn't come back. Again, the invitation came. Wij hebben veel kaas. Wij hebben veel kaas. I'll just have a look anyway, Klaas said. So he stepped down off the stool, tiptoed down the stairs, slipped into his wooden shoes, and ran to the pine trees on the sand dunes. When he arrived in a clearing, he stopped short and could not believe his eyes. His eyes opened wide as cheese wheels, for there in the clearing were dozens of the prettiest creatures he had ever seen. They were no bigger than dolls, but lively as crickets. And they were so brightly lit, well, they looked like lanterns with wings. Well, he had barely had time to recover from that surprise when the fairies encircled him, and one of them whispered in his ear, Kom met ons dansen. Come dance with us. Before he knew it, he had a fairy hand in each of his, and he was whirling around their circle, dancing faster and faster and faster, and went on and on until he began to see a pink hue on the eastern horizon. Well, after a while, he was quite spent, and he fell down into the center of the fairy ring to catch his breath. That's when he realized that all the fairies were now bringing him cheese. They came from every direction, north, south, east, and west. They brought red balls from Edam, yellow and gold spheres from Gouda, and the gray loaf-shaped cheeses from Leiden. Well, all those fairies had golden knives, and all of those fairies cut chunks off those cheeses, and they fed them to Klaas with their own hands. Oh, it was so delicious. Klaas thought now he would and could eat all the cheese he had ever wanted. Creamy, salty, delicious. Well, after a while, his jaws grew tired of chewing, and his stomach felt like it was full of cannonballs, and he wanted to stop. But Dutch fairies never tire, and they continued to cut off chunks of cheese, and they brought more and more cheese from every direction, so many that it piled up around Klaas like a wall. Still, they brought more. One of the biggest and strongest of the fairies brought in a giant cheese wheel from Friesland. It was as big as a cartwheel, but she trundled it along as if she were playing with a hoop. Delicious. But again, the wall piled higher and higher. The fairies were still feeding Klaas all the cheese, and the queen of the fairies hovered over him, saying, Ete, ete, ete. eat, eat, eat. Well, after a while, the wall grew so tall, Klaas felt like a frog in a well. It began to wobble, and so he screamed, thinking it was going to fall. But the Dutch fairies, well, they thought he was singing. For Dutch fairies don't know how a boy expresses himself. They brought more and more cheese. They brought cheese from Alkmaar, and then they brought the stinky cheese from Limburg that Klaas didn't like at all. Soon the wall was so tall and it was quaking, and Klaas knew that it was going to fall on him. He covered his eyes and waited for his demise. But nothing happened. He uncovered one eye and then the other, and he looked around. The cheese was gone. The fairies were gone. The sun was just coming up above the eastern horizon. He heard the cock crow from the Van Bommel farm, and in the distance in the village, he heard the clock chime. Well, he stood up and he felt his clothes, and there was dew on his clothes. Well, he shook himself a little and he began to walk back towards the farmhouse. Klaas never told anyone about what had happened that night, and he always wondered, did the fairies leave because the cheese tower fell or because the dawn came? Now, I would like to end with a little folk song, a little adapted folk song to go with the story. And this is a song about drie kleine kleutertjes, 3 little children who were sitting on a fence, open hek. Now, what were they talking about? Waarover spraken zij? Well, they must have been very hungry because they were talking about stukjes kaas, pieces of cheese, as yellow as the sun, zo geel als de zon. And all of this is happening on a lovely summer day in September. 3 kleine kleutertjes die zaten op het hek, bovenop het hek. 3 kleine kleutertjes die zaten op het hek, al op een mooie zomerse dag in september. Waarover spraken zij, die 3 daar op het hek, bovenop het hek? Waarover spraken zij, die 3 daar op het hek, al op een mooie zomerse dag in september? 'T was over stukjes kaas zo geel als de zon, geel als de zon. 'T was over stukjes kaas zo geel als de zon, al op een mooie zomerse dag in September. So again, I'd like to thank my fellow storytellers, Ginger, Chantal, for their organization, and to Storytellers of Canada in particular for supporting this project financially. Thank you so much, and thank you, listeners out there, for listening.